Get started. Welcome to the 3:30 session here, which is to talk about the international team and to try to get some of the previous gold medal winners together for sort of a panel discussion. That was the idea of this, and we'll see how it goes. My name is John Langford. I'm the serve at the pleasure of the NAR board as the chairman of the International Competition Committee, which the main responsibility of that committee is to organize the NAR's team every year to the World Championships. And there have been 20 of those World Championships since the creation of the hobby. This morning there was talk about the 1966 event, which was technically the first real international competition, but the first one that was sanctioned by the FAI, by the Fédération Aéronautique Internationale, was in 1972. In Versailles, Yugoslavia, a country that no longer technically exists. But to kind of give you a sense of the scale, and there have been 20 since then. You can see the preponderance of countries in Eastern Europe. Many of them actually derive from Yugoslavia. The number of countries in space modeling has stayed roughly constant from between about 20 and 30 over the last couple of decades. And you can see that it's been in the United States twice, but not for a while, and probably we're overdue for that. Obviously, things since 9/11 make it harder, we think, to do it in the U.S. But this is a plug for people who might be interested in getting involved in organizing an attempt to host the contest in the U.S. The next one is scheduled to be in the Ukraine in 2016, and so you can imagine that that's generating a lot of discussion at this point.
Hey, notice
the other name that's notably absent from this list is China, which has turned out to be a pretty big powerhouse in the hobby, but has not yet hosted a world championship. The United States has won some number of medals. If this list is not complete, please speak up. This is the list of gold medals that we think is fairly complete, and we hope to have. I think we have 3 of the folks. Come on in.
There's going to be next.
Oh, that's great. Come right on in. The Stenbergs are here, but not yet here in this room. So I'm hoping that they're going to show up. But Guppy was the first U.S. medal winner in '78. We'll talk more about that. Chris Flanigan in 1981 in payload and scale altitude. Phil Barnes won several gold medals. He may be the highest scorer to date, actually, on that. Bob Biedron, I guess Biedron has more in scale and in scale altitude. Unfortunately, he's not here today, but I think his Ariane is in the exhibit that is being officially opened today. An incredible masterpiece of a scale model. Jeff Benson in altitude, Ross Hironaka in streamer, John Marsh, this is Jay Marsh's son, was the first U.S. junior team winner and the first time that they held junior competition. Originally it was all one age group, just everybody out there together. And then in '94, for the first time, they split it into juniors, which is 18 and under, and everybody else. And the U.S. did not officially send a junior team until 2002, but John Marsh was there as part of the U.S. delegation. He's the one junior in '94 and actually won a gold medal in that, which until this year was the only U.S. junior gold. Bob Kreutz won in scale altitude. Tony Reynolds won in scale altitude, and then in this past round, Alyssa Stenberg won in scale altitude. So we'll talk about some of those. So the first one, I really wanted to kind of focus this discussion on S8 and S5. So S8 is radio controlled boost gliders, which was, you know, I'm sort of biased in this, but basically invented this by 2 guys in the room here today, by Bob Parks and by Hal Youngren, and come right in. And they're both with us today. And one of the things I had hoped that they would do is talk a little bit about how the RC boost glider came in its modern form, came into being, and that led to Gup winning the his gold, the first U.S. gold, in 1978. And so I want to kind of turn it, before I bring on Gup, I'm going to call on Parky. And because, you know, why don't you give your very brief history of how the modern RC boost glider got developed, came to be?
Let's see. Starting, well, just in the technology, the issue for boost gliders, particularly in the 70s, was getting equipment small enough to be reasonable to fly on the motors that you had to fly it with. And there was a lot of work all through the early 70s using very small pulse rudder type radios. You know, and a lot of this was actually developing the hardware for the radios that was lighter than anybody else had. And the problem with all of those was it was something where you sort of had control, it was very marginal, but you couldn't think about flying it under power. And the big breakthrough, it started with, I guess, Larry Renger's Skydancer at, what was that, 1970, 71, NARCON 11 or 12. That was something that would fly in a couple of D12s with servos, and you could think about flying it under power. And a group of us at MIT, it was Guppy, myself, Jeff Landis, Bernard Bialas, were working on these things. And the radio gear finally hit a threshold point around 1977 where you could actually build something that would be a legal E-engine boost glider under the 240-gram weight limit. And what that meant at the time was you had 95 grams of motor, about 10 grams of pop pod, 75 grams of radio, leaving you about 25 grams to build the glider. And so there's this huge effort on building these very lightweight gliders. And it finally came together in some people getting on the team in the 1977 trials, and then flying actually in the competition in 1978.
So Gup, why don't we use that as a lead-in and tell everybody about Dark Star and what it was like winning the first gold medal. How did that?
I'm just reminded of the 77 fly-offs. It was like a disaster for radio control. Nothing worked. Nothing worked. But we managed to qualify. And Bob rightly put this into a tipping point. Really, the tipping point was the year it finally hit the weight that we could actually target vehicles that would fly well as gliders on rocket glider, and they could actually be flown up as well. You could actually make a straight powered on control ascent, and that meant that you could go very, very high. And so the tipping point was really that the gear hit this magic weight, which was between about 65 and 75 grams for the system. And before that, most of the gliders had been kind of curiosities. They demonstrated radio control, but they were never going to be competitive. So the interesting thing was it was the point at which you sort of introduce a new skill set into boost gliders. The skill set is flying. So we had all had a lot of experience with RC gliders and stuff, so we were just in the right spot at the right time to take advantage of technology, finally pushing into the point where we could do this thing.
So we'll make it, I want to encourage to be interactive so people don't hesitate to either ask questions as we go or to jump in and add your own comments and stuff. When you flew in '78, well, first of all, before the World Championships, you basically rewrote the record books, right? Why don't you talk about how that happened?
Yeah, we
because
started
it really allowed something really cool.
The MIT Rocket Society, there's a bunch of people here, we're a great, very tight-knit group that went after FAI records. We started to work on radio control. We basically decided we would try to take all the FAI records if we could. We did for quite a while.
But how? What was the breakthrough that this enabled, which was?
So you
slope them, right? Now you can slope these things.
Yeah, well, the Cape Cod was a pretty clunky, heavy glider, but we flew for like an hour. You know, you could just heave it over the cliff with a D and then just fly for as long Your eyes fell out.
And then there were the A-motor records where you started it halfway up the rod because it couldn't boost any higher than the height of the rod.
And it took like 3 or 4 attempts to get it so that it just barely got up into the rod, and you had to get it to fall over the edge of the slope. Once you were over the slope, you could stay up as long as you had batteries. Yeah.
Your eyeballs didn't get filled with speckles.
Or your fingers froze.
Yeah, actually, I was going to point out one other thing that came together for '78 was that the gear came together. The models sort of had been working in the direction of these high-performance designs, and the motor. This was the key development. Was we got a motor that had a low enough average thrust that you could actually think about flying this thing on the way up. So it wasn't going supersonic, under control. So the E5 was a critical part of
Well,
that.
78 was an E5, but it was a D-rated
Yeah,
Flight
D-rated.
Systems Black Powder F7. Because the
Different
normal
E5 than
F7
today, right.
was just barely over 40 Newton seconds. So we were trying to convince them to make some that were just under, and it's like, okay, we want some special motors just under 40, and the first batch comes through and we test them, and they were the strongest F7s ever made. You know, they were like at 57 Newton, or 47 Newton seconds.
And that was a big part of making, the thrust had to be low enough to make a model that could hold together.
Yeah.
And so who else was flying RC in '78? The first time you went out there, did other countries fly RC, or was this something new to?
No, it was pretty new. We were flying against Flexies in '78, and you know, the skills you do for a free flight model are quite different than the skills for an RC model. RC model involves a lot of design of the glider to be extremely efficient, so it's a little bit more emphasis on that. You have to make it controllable, and you have to be able to fly it. And we practiced a lot. The gliders that we had at '78, let's see, it was Bernard Viales had an RC glider, Jeff Landis had an RC glider, Bob, of course, had an RC scale glider. He was going to do it no matter what. And so these are some of these pictures show some of the demo launches we did.
Yeah, this was a demo that was done with the 2 flagships and the 2 in the back. So that's obviously Tripp, looking actually rather smug in this picture. Does anybody remember this guy's name? He was.
I forget his name, but he was the
Sergeant
chief
Day.
scale judge.
Yeah.
And he's the one who gave me a 0 for my Bell X2
Yeah.
because it wasn't a Saturn or a Soyuz. I really like his expression in that photo.
And the rules, at that time RC was not a separate event. It was all gliders, it was all boost gliders in the 30% category.
Yeah, these are basically 240 gram gliders, and they're operating with a pretty heavy weight penalty for the gear, but they boosted so high and flew so well that they were quite competitive. And the nice thing was they came back.
The other big advantage that Guppy had on this one was he had better eyesight than anybody else there. So he would launch this glider, it would go way up, over 1,000 feet. He would head off somewhere and find a thermal. And the timers were going, where is it? And nobody would see the glider except for Guppy until after the 5-minute max he'd come back and land.
Now, there's one thing about the 78 World Championships, the team came together like I haven't really experienced before. A whole bunch of individuals that once we got to Copenhagen, Denmark, we're working on Tom Holly's scale model, which was about 2 kilograms too heavy. And, we're just everybody threw it all in together and worked as a team. And we had a great deal of luck. And you have that feeling when things start to work. It's like the opposite feeling when things are starting to break and screw up. But there was that feeling through that contest. Things were just kind of working, And so we lucked out, and everything worked long enough to get in 4 good flights.
And the U.S. has been relatively a powerhouse in this event ever since. I mean, there's no event that we completely dominate, and there's a lot of events that we kind of do our dutiful job of bringing up the rear for everybody else in. But, or we have one really bright star like Vedran who will make us look good in scale for the times we can convince him to show up. But over the years, Boost Glide has been one of the U.S.'s best events. And I want to sort of fast forward into the present with Alyssa. And Alyssa came on the scene actually now 3 contests ago and as what I'm sure at the time was the youngest competitor in that. Your brother might have taken that title.
Yes.
But at the time, and when Alyssa first showed up, before I'm gonna ask you to narrate this in just a second, Alyssa, but let me just give folks an introduction. When she first showed up, nobody could believe that she was really doing it herself. How old were you? Something like 10. So this is her. And they actually put a judge, this is a German judge here, who's camped out right at the side. There's Bill Stein, okay, the U.S. Coach, and only the contestants can go inside the range head area from there to actually watch and verify that Alyssa was prepping her own model and doing her own flying and stuff like that. And she's up against some pretty formidable competition. The Chinese are very good in this event, have gotten to be, especially the senior division. They have been the powerhouse for the last decade, and the Russians. I'm not going to tell. I'm going to let Alyssa tell the whole story. But this is the guy that she came up against into a fly-off. But let me turn it over to Alyssa to kind of narrate that. About how you got to this point and what happened before, leading up to that photograph. Alyssa?
Okay, well, first of all, preparing for this entire thing was a lot of work, but it was a lot of fun. I spent a long time practicing for this, and it was very intimidating for me because it's the World Championships, but I practiced and I worked hard and I qualified for the team, which was a huge relief because I've been working my whole RC career for it. And so I got there and I was very intimidated by all the competition I had with the other competitors there, the Chinese team, the Russian team, of course. I remember practice day didn't go so well. We had a lot of flights that didn't go well, and I finished here. I remember the Chinese team kind of looked over, chuckled a bit, went back to their own thing. Not many people took me seriously. Young girl on the team, who's gonna wait for that? But my first flight, I remember, was my knees were shaking. I was just standing up there, just oh my gosh. But it boosted well. I kept my cool, kind of, and I just remember that as soon as I landed, I just had the almost feeling of relief and just joy that I got a max, my first max in the World Championships, and I didn't believe that I did it, but I did. And the second flight and the third flight were not much better in terms of nervousness. I still felt the same nerve-wracking feeling, and with the judge kind of looking at me, very scary. I didn't know what he was going to say or do.
And this is by your third flight. He doesn't show up until the second flight, when it's clear that she's in the lead now. Wait a minute.
The conditions were the worst I've ever seen.
They were pretty bad, but I just kind of did my thing for the second and third flight, even when their officials kind of looking at me. And I got my second max, and I was like, okay, I can do this. I was feeling really proud of myself at this point, but there's still the last flight, which I had to get through. So last flight, there's this guy doing whatever, and there's the competitors kind of watching in the background. I just kind of zoned in, and I did the third flight. It was really scary, both the boost and the glide, but as soon as I landed and I got that third max, it was just the best feeling in the world. It was great, and I just felt so relieved and happy. I was hugging everybody. It was great, and I realized that I had tied with this Russian. So we were gonna have the fly off, and it was going to be I didn't believe that I had gotten this far. I was so happy. But at this point, I was like, whatever happens, I will be happy and proud of myself and the team. And so we were getting ready. We were getting ready for the fly off, and I was sent to go at like 3, 2, 1, launch, and the motor misfired. Yes. Yeah, the motor misfired. We thought, like, okay, we'll just put another motor in, let's go. But then we were stopped and said, like, no go. Like, that was my only chance.
Turns out in the internet,
Yeah.
if you have a misfire in a fly-off, that counts as your flight. And it actually is a rule that has bitten the U.S. a couple of times in the past. But it was what decided it here. So the Russian guy flew, and Alyssa was disqualified on technicality, so she won the silver.
Silver gun.
But the
Yeah.
team won
Yeah.
gold. We won the gold
Yes.
in the team. Now, the Russian guy, you gotta know, I love this picture too, because the facial expressions just say it all. This is a guy who, first of all, did not want to go back and say he lost to an American. Right? Second of all, he didn't want to lose to somebody who's like half his age. And third of all, he didn't want to lose to a girl. So he was very pleased that he won, but probably still, we all said, yeah, he won a total technicality in that, but it was a great goal. So then Alyssa came back. So this was in, let's see, they all kind of ran together. So that was this was Serbia, right?
Serbia, yeah.
In 2010. And then the team came back in 2012 in Slovakia. I don't know if I have a lot of pictures on that. I don't. So you want to just briefly recount what happened on the second outing? Second team.
The
Bad news,
second,
good news.
my teammates Matthew and Craig, they just turned like 18. They moved on, so we had to find new team members. So of course there's that one.
That's what the
Don't worry, my sister calls me that one as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. And then we had to look for like another team member. So we found Brendan. He was like he had gotten into RC. He practiced. He was flying. So yeah, okay, join. He qualified. I qualified. So we went to the 2012 in Slovakia. Yes, Slovakia. I didn't do as well as I did in Serbia. Of course, I mean, can't expect that. But
She had an RC problem caused a crash.
yes, yeah, an RC problem caused my glider to crash. But Zachary, nobody really expected it.
Well, here, and you won bronze, right? You came, so
Yeah.
Zach won bronze.
Alyssa's still bitter because
in that.
her record of winning a medal at age 10, which the Russians said would never be broken, was broken 2 years later by an 8-year-old. Happened to be Zachary. And I honestly don't think
Now
that
we need a
will ever do it.
6-year-old.
Yeah.
Ryan.
Right.
And then in 2014, you flew for a third time.
Oh yes.
And in that, you won a silver medal.
Yep.
Again, I apologize, I don't have pictures set of all this. But why don't you say just a little bit about in 2014 and the silver medal that you won in that? Yeah.
The silver medal, I actually.
Were you as nervous?
Oh yes. I don't think it'll really go away for me because it's the World Championships. I mean, it is a lot of fun. So the amount of fun that I have keeps going up, but the nervousness is still there because it's in front of the whole world. But it's always a fun thing to have the opportunity to fly like that. But for this on 2014, I actually didn't expect that I was gonna get a silver medal because I was having problems and I didn't think I was gonna get the medal. Wasn't there RC problems in this one as well?
No, you caught really bad cold air in your first flight.
The cold air. that happened kind of brought my plane down. So, like, I didn't think I was gonna, I thought I was out of it. I was still like rooting for my teammates and everything. But when we looked at the board, the final board after my flights, like, I couldn't believe that my name was there. And, you know, we all shouted for joy. We were celebrating. I was crying with happiness. Yeah. And it was, like, at first I was sad because, you know, I didn't do as well. But then those tears of sadness turned into tears of joy because I got,
Well, she had a battery die
Yes.
20 seconds before landing, and if you miss the box, you
You don't
lose
get that
points,
minute,
and
yes.
it almost takes you out of attention. The
Yeah.
battery died right before it landed and fluttered right outside of the box.
Yeah.
And so she thought she was completely out of it, so the silver
So
really
you
came
got
in.
a silver and the team got a silver, right?
Yes, the
So-
team got a silver as well,
The team
because we all
got a
flew well.
silver, so that's,
Pretty
and I
cool.
think the team gold that you guys got in 2010 is, I think, the only junior gold that we've gotten as a team so far.
John, talk just a little bit about the engines and one of the advantages we do have now.
Sure, well, why don't you talk a little bit about it, man?
Well, and Gary's here.
Or Gary, yeah.
One of our advantages is Gary, and that's a great idea, and he's
And Gary's
so why don't you
continued
say-
support for the 2016 team.
But I will say, I mean, we have the D3s, we have the D4s. You know, the Chinese.
Come with us
wanted
next
the
time,
engines.
Gary.
The Chinese wanted the
Yeah.
engines. Nobody has the engines like we do for this event. Nobody.
We've told the Chinese 6 different stories about what these engines are made out of. The special Estes black powder engines, yeah.
Well, I have
It's
to go
always
back
made
to
of fairy dust.
go to the beginning when, I don't know, Marky and I started a conversation, I think it was back in the late 70s. Wasn't it that far long?
I forget when we really started.
I think I was still in Las Vegas in the Air Force. And,
Yeah.
We were talking about it and then.
And you had the original E20,
Right, well,
and I was looking at, okay, can we make one of these gliders that can use the E20 instead of the black powder F7 derivatives? And we got talking, you said, oh, I can make an inverter.
yeah, and back then we had made some with composite dynamics and they were fiberglass casings with phenolic liners or other kind of liners. They even tried gasket material, all kinds of things like that. Then it turned out that just straight phenolic tubing was the best casing for these long burn motors. And just one thing led to another, and then we have the the E6. And I remember the first few tests, they were all blistering on the outside, and I was really worried about it. And then we stuck it in a motor mount tube, and then it would keep them from blistering. And, yeah, I've forgotten a lot of the details
Yeah.
of what happened, but the E6 led to the F10, and then we went trying to remember what was next. Then we came out with reloadable versions, and then there was the D3s, and I think, Bob, weren't you involved in that too?
Yeah.
We talked about that. And, just over the years, there's been a lot of evolution of these things. For example, one of the problems we had with end burning composites was if you cast them in a straight the propellant in a paper tube, you'd occasionally get little glitches in the thrust curve. And those were caused by when the propellant cured, for some reason it pulled air in, I call them casting voids, if you will. It would pull in little voids into the propellant, and it would cure like that. It would be like little cavities, little caverns. And when the flame front met those cavities, you just see a blip in the curve. Sometimes it was, what, half a pound, a pound?
No, sometimes the spike at the end was bigger than the spike at the beginning.
And I don't know whether you or somebody else was saying these glitches were like almost causing the motor. Oh, maybe it was George was saying that.
This was '92 when George Robichaud was practicing for the
Yeah.
engines. And you could tell, right, it would pop and then the wings would come off.
The other thing for these, the E5, E6 class motors, the World Championships debut of those coincided with the first S8 rocket glider competition, which was in Poland in 1983. And the team was Phil Barnes, myself, and my wife Karen. And we had been doing a lot of practicing, a lot of refinement on the models. These were no moving parts rocket gliders. They totally relied on you flying them on the way up. And we had this really cool new motor. And oh, by the way, the weight limit went from 240 up to 300 grams. So weight was not an issue anymore other than for performance. So we get to the contest, and the first thing is they static test all of the motors. And I wasn't there for it, but what I basically heard, when they put the first of these E-motors on the thrust stand, they light it off. And there's no smoke, there's this little clear blue flame. And it came in at like 39.7 newtons. And they put another one in and it comes out at 39.8 newton seconds. And you know, basically every jaw dropped. And they were out doing practice flights, and most everybody else is trying to go something resembling straight up. And I've been playing with these for a long time. I've flown RC for a long time. So I go and launch, and I do a Cuban 8 under power. That's very obviously deliberate, and some more jaws drop. So the result for that was the US got first, second, and third in RC rocket glider. We doubled the second place team. And then we found out it wasn't an official event.
Oh. Well, the only other thing I'd say is that as of the last couple of years, we figured out what was causing those blips in the curve. We switched to a different casting tube, which prevented all that air from infiltrating, and we have like rock solid thrust curves. Actually, just a little bit aggressive on those, but pretty nice motors, I think.
Yeah, the original thing was Gary asked me what's the best thrust curve we could do. And I went off and did some analysis work and said, yeah, we want a spike about like this and a sustainer about like that. And a little bit later, here comes a thrust curve that exactly matches what I was asking for. And you know, the motor's been refined a little bit over the years, but it's still pretty similar performance to the 1980s.
We need to get them safety certified so that we can practice with them without getting waivers at our contest events. Would be my only suggestion.
You're on the US
And we're
team.
almost to the point where we need to get that, so they can be generally, because building the team, building the core of folks who fly the event, that's one of the big things. But here, while you're here, we do want to thank you, because you are really one of the you know, in Seattle we have all these 12-man party things as well, and the Internet's team, Gary's like, probably the 30th man on the team. It's the unsung hero who's not actually at the contest, but those motors really make a difference. So. So one of the other events that the U.S., you know, I hesitate to use the word powerhouse, but has done well in over the years is scale altitude, which is kind of a strange event in that you actually build a scale model and then you try to fly it as high as it can go. And this event has actually been in there since the beginning of the Internets. It was flown in '74. I know John Fleischer flew. Who else flew in that? But I think, Chris, you won a gold medal in that in 1980. Is that correct?
Correct.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that progression of how you got into scale altitude and how you won your gold medal?
Okay, well, I'll say a few words. I'm going to ask Mr. Guppy to be prepared to say a few words as well.
Yeah, we got a chart for him. So he's Tony Reynolds today. So.
Oh, are you Tony Reynolds?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I got my gold medal back in the days where scale altitude meant build a scale model and fly it as high as you possibly could. So you built a 18 millimeter diameter D-region Tomahawk, and it's really a construction challenge from the standpoint that you've got to put in tiny little screws, and you know, they're like, they're probably like 1/32 inch aluminum tubing or something like that. So it's really small details, and then you're flying as high as you can. Optical tracking, immediately get your model coverable with red tracking pattern. So it's an event you gotta love in order to basically just make an incredible model and destroy it. Since those days, the event has changed. The FAI has introduced requirements in model sizes, and that has generated an entire generation of models that we'll be talking about here in this slide here. And James can talk about that. And beyond what James might say, there's another generation of changes. So this is an event that continues to evolve and to provide a new challenge. So it's not just the same old thing every time. It's always something kind of new and exciting.
So for a long time, they were, as Chris said, sort of IQSY Tomahawks, D-Region Tomahawks, sort of straightforward rockets. Then they moved to 2 stages. Bedron 1, he was flying Nike Apache or a Sergeant Hydax or something like that. But somewhere in there, and I don't know the exact year that the rule got put in, that basically said you had to have a certain large diameter on the first stage, 40 millimeters for the juniors and what is it, 50 for the seniors, over some percentage of the length. And it drove you to do strange things. I'll just say that. And I want to at that point turn the story over to James Duffy to kind of narrate what happened. It took a couple of years to get to the point where other people began to pay attention.
Right. I believe it was 2000 where the rules changed, where you had to have a fat booster with a skinny sustainer. And the people who had looked at appropriate prototypes at that point determined that on paper, a bumper whack was the way to go. The problem was that a bumper whack yielded a minimum diameter, roughly 10.5 millimeter sustainer that was essentially unrecoverable.
And optical tracking.
And optical tracking, that's the other component there. So nobody really pursued the bumper whack, with the exception of Jan Katua of Slovakia and Tom Campbell of the US. And Tom Campbell campaigned bumper whacks a couple of times. When I came on the team in 2002, Tom, Dr. Bob Kreutz, and myself all flew bumper whacks and did abysmally that year. It was not a good year for us. Tony and I, the next cycle, 2004, constituted the entire U.S. senior team. We were it. We were loud and we were Texan, and we decided to go to Poland and have fun. We accidentally ended up winning the event. I should say, I'm not kidding there. We showed up with bumper whacks that were not as good as anything else that was on the table. We ended up dead last, following static. You can see Tony's model downstairs. It's not a pretty model, and I get to say that because I designed it. But it emphasized that it is a scale altitude event, not a scale event with some altitude. It is an altitude event first, in my opinion. Long story short, we came up with an idea. We called it a vertical cluster. We essentially ignited at ignition, at liftoff, the booster engine and a small piece of thermalite that hung out the aft end of the sustainer. That gave you a split-second delay between booster ignition and sustainer ignition. And when the rocket was about 8.5 feet in the air, the sustainer would ignite.
Yeah, this is about max altitude.
That's about max altitude.
It looks like a great picture, but that's the highest space station.
On top of that, and here's the secret sauce, here's what we've never talked about publicly, we put a piston inside the booster. And it took off like a bat out of hell. And Tony and I fortunately ended up in first and second place that year with the worst models on the table. And it was very gratifying to get to hear the national anthem that evening at the awards ceremony. We
Somebody recognized because it was like a state song of Texas.
They had to download it probably.
We've since improved the models over the years, and for the last 2 cycles, we've done very well. We ended up 4th place as a team both times. We came within 1 recovered rocket shy of a gold medal in 2012. The secret sauce the last 2 years was, of all things, a B-14O.
Right.
The B-60s would get them to, we're not exaggerating, about 10 feet before staging. A B-14 would get it up to about 75 feet before staging.
It was
And it was
amazing. Yeah.
and we consistently outflew the field.
And everybody was digging in their closets for the 14-0.
And mad props to Steve Crystal for sourcing the motors there. So, but the rules all changed this year, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Chris.
Yeah, we figured out, so we've actually, one of the things we've learned how to do is, we've learned how to change the rules, too.
Yes.
And there's a lot of stuff on the internet, people always griping about the rules and how crazy they are, and how they evolve. And that's a whole other subject that we won't get into, but the rules are going to be different going forward, which is a good lead-in to Alyssa's gold medal in this event. But look, Chris, why don't you just say a little bit about the rules change before we go to Alyssa's story of her gold, because her gold will not be repeated.
One thing I'll say about the FAI rule change, it's very similar to U.S. politics. It's like sausage, nobody wants to really see it. But you have to have a personal investment, and I appreciate John and everybody else who spent that much effort to pursue this with enough persistence in order to make these things feasible and make them happen. In terms of what scale altitude, or S5, is going to be for the next World Championships, rather than having to have a fat booster and a nearly invisible upper stage, it has now changed to where however many stages you have, whether it's 1 stage, 2, or even 3, or whatever, each stage has to have a minimum diameter of 30 millimeters for at least half the length of each stage.
For seniors.
For seniors. And for juniors, it's 25 millimeters, and I think a 500 millimeter length. Seniors, 600 millimeter length. So what that's going to mean, based on some test vehicles that we've developed and flown, you have very pretty scale altitude models which are now recoverable. That the teeny tiny whack booster just doesn't vaporize out into some European potato field.
Well, and we'll see what really ends up winning. It should, in theory, and these things always have unintended consequences, but the goal was to make it so you didn't just get one prototype, right? And you can kind of see in the scale room, it is coalesced down to a handful of prototype rockets. Those are scale models, right? But the scale altitude models, you can tell, because there's only a couple of kinds of prototypes. One of the things they did in the last cycle was they added a bonus of 40 points for originality. In other words, if you were the only one with a certain kind of a prototype, you got 40 extra points. And this turns out to be important in the story Alyssa's about to tell, because in this, you can see there's one rocket back there in the corner that's a little different from all the rest, and that's, you're going to hear more about that in a minute. But to try to get a broader diversity of prototypes kind of drove that rules change. So this was, if you were in the German rocket session earlier, you kind of heard about the story of the V2 and the bumper wax. Another approach to this was that you could lay out the rules, and the rules kind of showed a rocket of a certain length and certain diameters and all of that, and it turns out to look basically exactly like that. And one of the advantages of having your own company is that we built a prototype. Actually had an NAR memory, Larry Baskett. Ellis designed it, and Larry Baskett built it, and flew a prototype of something called the Space Grant 1 back in 2000. And
2001 was the flight of the prototype.
was that right? Okay,
Yeah,
so let me
so 2002 was the first expedition for the space grants.
I'm going to flash through these very, very quickly, just because it's a great story that hasn't really been told, and I promise I will go through it very, very, very quickly. So, okay, so Ellis takes the rules, designs a rocket that fits the rules. We go through trying to debug it, make it work. It has this rear ejection system so that you can deploy a streamer in there that Bob Biedron actually invented in the 90s, as far as I know, and we refined on this. Lots of tests where the model was strapped down into the launcher because as said earlier, these things go out of sight with even a small amount of impulse. There's the prototype. This is Larry Baskett, who built it.
And one note is that these pictures are in chronological order. You will notice
Yeah.
the models were built
Scale model
first.
was built first, then the prototype. There's Trip, yeah. And then in 2002, this is the U.S. junior team and this is the U.S. senior team. So we show up, you know, thinking that the junior team, there's Ellen Fritz and Abby Clark. You can notice that the teams do tend to run in families, okay, on the junior teams, that's been a big part of it. We went out there and immediately discovered how big the fields were, because when we staged, that's what you did the rest of the day, was look for the model in the, and even if you didn't like the upper stage. The trackers did not see them, and we spent most of our time with the team out in the fields looking. People had, although you had 3 opportunities, you often only got one flight, because in scale altitude you only get one model. And if you don't get the upper stage back, you can't fly again. And so there was quite a bit of activity there, and of course we did not even get on the boards that year. So the team came back again in Poland in 2004. This is now Gibb Reynolds. The team here is Gibb, Fritz, and Abby, and they again built Space Grants. And again, we flew 3. This is a copy of the results board. You can see us down here at the bottom. DQ, DQ, DQ. So nothing on the boards at all. You can sort of see where the model scored, and generally very low in the standings. And then we tracked them in the United States, so we knew they could do 550 meters, which if you look at the winning scores on these is well into gold medal. A 550-meter flight would win a gold medal at any of those. And we were getting those altitudes in the U.S. So we went to Baikonur, another team. This was 2 Reynolds and the Langford in it. This time we had decided that we trained everybody. We actually organized training sessions of how to fly these models. And we actually got, that's Fritz and Gibb prepping, we actually did 11 flights that time, which you only get 9 slots. So how does that work? Well, it's because if you lose your track, you get to fly again. And if you get good at recovering, you can actually do 2 flights in a round. So that's at Baikonur. Again, flights that were really high. Some actually even got tracked, but then we have a streamer separate, or we just could not break the code and get on the board. Lots of very exciting, down to the last 30 seconds in the round to get a flight off, but still no medal on that. This was one of the Reynolds ones, and there would be a lot of recovery because they didn't always stage. It made it easy to get the parts back, but it did require some more prepping to prep it on the ones that didn't stage. So here we go now into, what is this, Matt? This is 2010? This is Serbia? So the U.S., now there's only 2 space grants. People start saying, maybe this isn't such a good idea after all. Matt's, both of them were your daughters, right?
Yeah.
So the 2 Steele girls were flying in this. And again, most of what you see is a few seconds of excitement followed by hours of looking for it. We've gone to altimeters now, so the optical tracking part is gone, and we're actually getting tracked flights. These models turned out to be heavy. They were built of glass, and so while they turned out to be reliable, they were pretty heavy. And
they got slammed so bad at the judging. I mean, they flew the highest, but they got hurt so bad.
so then in 2014 we had we changed the rules a year ago, so we knew this was going to be the last shot in 2014. And so the U.S. fielded a team of bumpers and space grants. Alyssa entered the space grant, and I love these shots. This is this sort of like the Yaya sisterhood of scale altitude here. And Alyssa, I'm going to kind of let you take it over from here, because what you guys did was nothing short of incredible. You were flying with Allison Van Milligan.
Yes, she really helped me.
Talk about what's going on, what this was like.
Well, there was a lot to be done in the preparation for flight on this model. You had to tuck everything in, push it in, make sure everything was set. You had to. There was just like a whole lot to do with the stages, the motor, and everything. Actually, I'm going to start with like the static judging actually, because
Yeah, keep going. I'm gonna, while you talk about it, I'm just gonna pull up a picture of the thing of the judges.
you know, I set it on the.
See the scores there.
Yep.
Yeah.
I set it on the table and everything, and the static judging, we didn't know what was going to happen, but that 40-point thing for uniqueness, yeah, that came into play, and
40 more points for the third
Mhm.
stage.
She's moved in from the bottom of the standings. She had the
To-
highest static score.
yes,
Of
first,
anybody else.
it was
which amazing.
unbelievable. Yes, yeah.
For American.
So back to the flying. Preparation for the first flight. Everything went well. I mean, there was a lot to do. It was a bit much, but we got it done. There's always like a little bit of rush, you know, because of the time slot that we have. So we got it on the pad. Got ready to launch. We launched it. Unfortunately, the bottom fin part of the Space Grant came off, so it was a disqualified flight. But I mean, the rest of the flight worked well. The second the stage boosted, and we actually got it back.
And what was your score?
The score read well above like 600 feet.
Yeah.
600
Meters.
40 meters.
Yeah, the judge.
The highest we'd ever
The
seen.
judge felt bad for us. We were like, "Oh, beautiful flight," but you know, disqualified. So
Look at Alyssa.
I love this one. So by the third flight, same thing before. So now people are going, wait a minute, this thing's going higher than anything out there. And so the judges, she's ready to go. She's put up her hand. I love that look. It's WTF.
The judges never leave the tent. For two of Alyssa's medals, they left the tent.
They like wait, hang on, and they actually like came to the pad. It was like they
What does this thing have? Warp
What were
drive?
they looking for? John, what were they looking for? I remember seeing
I have
that.
no idea.
yeah, we don't know
Anything
what
they could
were-
find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was one more twist to this story, and I'm going to ask you to tell it, James, because Daniel is sort of a protege from Texas, next generation. Talk about this story. This is the board here. I don't know if everybody in the back can read it, but this is in the middle of the round, or the initial results. You can see Alyssa's there at 398, the high static. On her third flight, actually got on the boards, and they were just amazing. The preparation that went into that to pull off those 3 flights was staggering. But even more surprising is she's not in first place. Daniel is in first place. So why don't you pick up that
And
story?
this story, more than anything, outlines the difference between the way America goes to play this game and the way everybody else plays this game. So Daniel Kelton's a young guy from Texas I've been working with for many years. He was on the champion TARC team
Yep.
2 years ago that
Yep.
won both TARC and the International Rocketry Challenge, so he knows his stuff. The last 2 cycles I've helped him build bumper wax. He's a great kid and a fierce competitor, and will do anything you tell him to. You just point him in the right direction. Long story short, he gets DQ'd on his first flight. Preps again, second round, he flies, probably doesn't stage. He gets an altitude of probably in the neighborhood of 75 meters, but it didn't stage. But it's a qualified flight, he's on the board. He takes the altimeter, remember we've gone from optical tracking to altimeters, to the altimeter tent. And they tell him he's got a flight of 660 meters, is that correct?
680.
It just wasn't right. He tells him, no, I didn't fly 680 meters. And he's told, basically, by responsible adults Yes, you did. Go away.
That's right.
Daniel is a responsible young man. He's got good moral character. Comes to me and says, no, I didn't. I said, you need to make some noise about this. It takes several hours for John and Bill and Daniel working together to convince the contest administrators that he did not fly that high. They could not understand why anybody would give up a gold medal. And
And not just an individual, so he's in first place, and the team is in first place, right? Because here's the US in gold, so we have both a gold and a silver individual and a gold team. Okay, keep going.
he DQs in the third round, unfortunately, so the day is over for him, but it's just beginning because he's got to convince people that no, I am not the gold medalist here.
But didn't he get a special award or something?
Yeah, at the end, so this
He did.
is, I love this shot.
Yeah.
This is after the results keeper, who's a great guy, by the way, he was the contest director from Serbia. But he was running the thing, and he said, okay, you guys, you don't want that stuff, and he goes and he tears the results off the board. Kind of like, okay, you guys happy now? You have what you want. And they repost the new ones, which is a little harder to read. But here's Alyssa in first place, which is really cool. But what it does is it drops the U.S. from first place in the standings down to fifth place in the standings. So that was a momentous feat of sportsmanship. And, you know, in terms of the consequences of good sportsmanship, that it's hard to imagine. I've never seen anything more dramatic than that, and I think it's something that, of all the things we can take pride of in the team, that's one of the things that I think most of us are most proud of, is that we have juniors who are willing to do that kind of a thing. And as James said, the Europeans were sort of flabbergasted at
Heck, I wasn't even there or on any team, and I was reading about it, and I was proud of it.
Yeah, it was really neat, and they recognized it too. They did at the end of the final awards ceremony give a special good sportsmanship award that I think they made up. I'd never heard of that.
There's a quick postscript to that I'd like to share. He came home with the mother of all college essay topics.
Yes, he did.
$2,000 worth of scholarships will soothe those wounds.
And Alyssa came home with the gold medal, and there she is getting the well-earned gold around her neck. So that. So I just wanted to go and we'll wrap this up with this last chart, which is to say that, you know, this is an ongoing kind of a story, and you saw this morning, or you saw during the lunch, the pictures that Vern or somebody showed of the team in 1966. This is the junior team. I just love this shot. This is the junior team from 2014. And, you know, this is not your grandfather's space modeling team. So, I am really proud of that. And, you know, part of what we're trying to do with the NAR is to build the program. It's not an exclusive thing. It's really a lot of fun. It's something that other countries comment to us on. They go, you guys may not win very many medals, but you sure seem to have a lot of fun. And it has been the bringing in, particularly of the families, but you don't have to bring your whole family. I mean, you can come on your own too. That's great. And the NAR works very hard. The NAR actually provides out of its budget each year money, which is matched by some corporate contributions, with the idea of making it possible for every junior to go at minimal cost. I won't say it's free, but at a highly subsidized rate. The NAR really takes care of its junior team, and to provide some scholarship help for anybody who gets on the team that needs to go. And we do the team selection by competitive fly-off. It's always held the weekend before the NARCON. And so this year, out in Tucson or Phoenix? Tucson. Tara Willard is going to be the contest director for the fly-offs. It'll be the weekend before NARCON, and we'll be flying the event to select a team for, well, I hate to say for going to the Ukraine, but for wherever the contest ends up being held, is how I'll put that. And we really do encourage everybody here, but also spread the word, because it is one of the really vibrant parts of the NAR. It's something that the NAR board supports, and it's a great program, and I'm really pleased to be associated with it. And what we've tried to do here is kind of share the idea that it's a lot of fun to be a part of it, and that is you know, for a whole range of ages. So appreciate everybody coming to this.
And John,
we can just open it for questions or comments or whatever.
We take
Yes.
supporters as well as team members.
Yes.
over. So like Bob Alway, I think you all know, came over one year as a team supporter.
Yes.
He had this endless duffel bags of Gatorade and goodies and everything like that, and just, you know, so even if you're not a competitor, the US traditionally sends over the largest contingent. We took 48 last time,
right.
and like that. So you can go and observe and help or be a timer and have a lot of fun. You don't even have to make it as a team in order to be part of the team.
Exactly.
John, I would like to
Steve,
give,
yes.
for anyone considering bringing their child, there is nothing like this in the world that you can take your child to. And that's number one. Number two, mine in the front there, just started college. The scholarship that she was awarded, turns out that participating in this was one of the most sound financial decisions we've ever made.
Well, and I just have to say that, you know, it is a lot of fun, but just to be sure, we also take along an emergency physician. So it's even better.
Who we've used almost every year.
Yeah, it does in fact get used almost every year. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You said this is all of the junior team?
Yeah, I
The
think
last junior team.
that is the 2014 junior team. We lost 2 juniors in the last couple of weeks before, so I think we had either 14 dropping to 12 or 12 dropping to 10, but that is the junior team.
Hold on, I believe I can figure that out. I have the most recent magazine. Give me a sec.
One comment.
Yes.
Go girls!
Exactly. Is exactly.
And when Zachary starts liking girls, he'll be really glad.
The magazine says 8 of the junior teams, 12 members being women, all the blah, 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 blah. 2 were unable to attend the last moment, so it looks like you got 10.
Yeah. No, I believe it's exactly right. That is one of the things that we are most proud of, is building the diversity in the team, and that's something that we hope to continue to do, and that it drives forward not just for the NAR, but obviously a lot of us are also involved in TARC and the idea of training people into the profession, and it's even more important to get women and other underrepresented groups into the aerospace profession, and this is a big way to do it. This is one of the only ways I know to do it, is to get people interested when they're young, and have them stay with it. Yes,
And
ma'am.
so one other thing, so if you want to go in a slightly less competitive environment, we did 2 years ago, we took a US team to the European Championships, because the European Championships and the following year World Championships are on the same field. And so we kind of sent a scout team of 10 Americans last time to the 2013 European Championships, and if things don't go totally to hell in Ukraine,
So
we're hoping to do the same in 2015.
So if you're really not sure you want to go to Ukraine for the World Championships, you can try it out this year. You can go to Ukraine for the European Championships and decide.
And that one's a little bit different, where you don't, if you want to get on the team, there'll be an announcement for it, but you just send a resume. And our goal then is to provide, on that team, we're not eligible to win medals at the European Championships, because America is not really European. So the idea is to try and give people a broad exposure to events, and we try and pick people where they can maybe get exposed and fly something that they just want to go fly, as opposed to trying to put together a winning team. There'll be one or two teams that we potentially will try and field an all-star lineup, but that's all more about going and having fun and
Well,
getting an idea.
And
of
working out the rule changes. Alyssa and Zachary and Brandon would not have their silver, and Alyssa would not have their
Yes.
silver in 14 had they not gone 13 to Bulgaria. They changed the rules. We had to redesign the glider because you have to land it, dunk it into a box. And we had to change a lot of the design because of that, and it was a disaster. But the redesign proved successful, obviously, for the World Championships. We would not have figured that out had we not gone to Bulgaria the first time.
Just in terms of political stability, the 1983 World Champs in Poland was supposed to be in '82. That was when Solidarity happened in Poland. And it was definitely there in '83, although underground, but it was very obvious. The 1991 USSR meet was a couple of weeks after the coup when Yeltsin came into power. And we actually had the Soviet Union falling apart in the middle of the contest. And we had a really good party to kick the, I believe, the Latvian off of the Soviet team. At that contest, it didn't take much excuse for a party other than it was the end of the day. That was the excuse that night.
It is
They may be
amazing. I
joined.
mean, at the team managers meeting last summer, I mean, the Ukrainians and the Russians are sitting right next to each other and sharing the same translators, and they're all good friends. So it really is a real up close and personal view of the broader world, which is another part of why I think it's so great to get the juniors involved too, because it's one thing to read about it, but getting over there and meeting people your own age from around the world is.
John, you want to go back to Alyssa's gold medal, because it's interesting who she's between. Flip it back to Alyssa. Go, where's her?
That's the VG, right?
Do you have her? No, you don't have her.
Oh, I do. I had a second presentation.
Oh, it was another.
Anyway.
Where she's between a Ukrainian and a Russian.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so, just in closing, we thank Gary. I also want to thank Tom on behalf of the support that the NAR provides to this. I know it's the whole NAR board, but if you carry back, again, our appreciation to the board, because the support that the board has provided, for coming up on a decade now, since the NAR took the program back from the AMA, has really been what's enabled us to build this junior team. We want to keep that going. So thanks.
Well, and you, John, and Les, you guys are really the glue. It's just amazing what they do for this team. It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
Here, here.